Okay, so let's see. This is one section, and you're familiar already with Matthew, where you have the narrative and then the discourse. Now, Matthew 13:53 to 18:35 is not an exception to that. Why? We have a narrative mixed with much dialogue. 13:53 to 17:27 is a lot, okay? Just to name them, okay, the topics. There's a rejection at Nazareth. There's the feeding of the 5,000 and walking on the water, and then controversies with the Pharisees, okay, and then healings, okay, and then feeding the 4,000, Peter's confession, first passion prediction, transfiguration, and the second passion prediction. The third passion prediction will belong to the next part, okay, but we have the discourse part, which is the sermon on the church, all 35 verses of chapter 18. Okay, so you see that we're in the fourth part in that case, okay, or in the third part going to the fourth part. The discourse will be the one, 18 to 35. That's the fourth part, the one that would introduce Matthew 19:1. Anyway, let's see. Let's take it from this part, okay? Then the disciples came and asked him, why do you speak to them in parables? He answered, to you it has been given to know the secrets of the kingdom of heaven, but to them it has not been given. Remember, the last discourse that we had was in parables. Now, therefore, in what follows, Jesus turns his main attention to the disciples from whom the church will develop, especially to Peter, the rock on whom the church will be built. So as I said, no, this is like a catechesis, especially Christological, about Jesus, and then about the church. Okay, let's look at this, no? The rejection at Nazareth. Now, this helps explain why Jesus must concentrate on his disciples. Why? He was rejected at Nazareth because even his townspeople do not accept him. Okay, and Matthew shows greater reverence for Jesus and his family. Remember that when we took this in Mark, okay, we also speak about his family. But Mark was rather harsh with the family. Here, there's greater reverence for Jesus and his family. So he makes three small changes from the Nazareth story in Mark 6:1 to 6. So first, he does not report that Jesus was a carpenter, okay, or was a prophet with honor among his relatives, or could do no miracle there. So Matthew does not say these, okay? So Matthew substitutes for Jesus was a carpenter with the son of a carpenter, okay? For Mark's carpenter, okay, that substitution for Mark's carpenter, son of a carpenter. Now, this is the reason why we depict Joseph as a carpenter, because of this passage, okay? So you underscore that one, you highlight that. Now, another point is this, okay? 14:1 to 12, how Herod killed John the Baptist, okay? I'll just comment about this. I will not elaborate, but Herod was superstitiously uneasy about Jesus. So that's the point which Matthew placed. And then the next one, we find Jesus feeds the 5,000 and then walks on the water. Okay, so going back to Mark 6:52, which is a parallel to this, the disciples failed to understand. In Matthew 14:33, at the end of these two miracles, they worship Jesus as the Son of God. See, there's that difference. If you're frustrated by Mark's account here, okay, so they worship Jesus. Now here, Mark would have expected the readers to recognize already the identity of Jesus. But here, you know that they acknowledge him already. So the walking on the water, okay, we find a Matthean scene. It's only in Matthew where we find Peter walking on the water and then Jesus saving him. So Jesus invites Peter to come with him in the water. And as Peter begins to sink, Jesus helps him. Now, this is one of these instances of special Petrine material in Matthew. So a lot on Peter when we go to this Gospel of Matthew, and you know why. In the introduction, we talked about it. So what do we see in Peter? Impetuousness, okay? And then the inadequacy of his faith. How little faith you have. What little faith you have. And then Jesus, that individual care to lead Peter farther, they're quite characteristic, okay? Very picturesque. Now, as a man of little faith who would sing unless the Lord saved him, oh, Peter is representative of the other disciples. Their faith and his in the Son of God gain strength from Jesus' powerful helping hand. See? And here's my reflection here. The words of Jesus come strong. Take courage. It is I. Do not be afraid. And in fact, if you go to the Greek, take courage, it is I. It is I is ego eimi. It's I am. And you know the meaning of that. Okay? Now, as in our daily lives, where we find that the presence of our mother or father or that of the friend takes away our fears, the presence of the Lord quells the fear of the disciples. At the suggestion of Peter, Jesus responds, come. Oh, help me walk in the water, and come. So the Lord invites us to come to him, to share in little marvels that he does. But if we fail, we find him gently chiding us. No? Oh, you have little faith. Why did you doubt? It's more an endearment rather than a rebuke. And then we see in chapter 14, verses 34 to 36, Gennesaret, okay, Jesus heals the sick. Okay, I will not elaborate on that. No, it's a summary. That's what we see. Now, in chapter 15, verses 1 to 20, we have here a debate with the Pharisees and the scribes. There is that controversy, okay, in which the people and the disciples enter. Now, the attack on the Pharisees is sharp in Matthew. Blind guides, okay, who will be rooted out. In Mark 1:17, the disciples ask about what defiles. In Matthew, the one who asks is Peter. So that privilege given to him, that leadership that he has. What does Matthew omit here? The comment that Jesus made all things clean. Remember that, no? By this he made all things clean in Matthew. So it's a comment that not only offers historical difficulties. If we go with the one of Mark, so maybe the one who redacted that one, remove that because it would bring difficulties. But it also might have offended Matthew, for whom the law is not so easily abolished. Okay. Now, Matthew 15:21 to 28, Jesus went to Tyre and Sidon, and there he heals the daughter of the Canaanite woman. In Mark, it's a Syrophoenician woman. Here, the Canaanite woman, but the episode is the same. Okay, it's very much like the healing of the centurion servant boy in Matthew 8:5 to 13. What is that? Long distance healing. Okay. At this point, what do we find? Jesus goes to the peripheries. Where? Tyre and Sidon. If you look at the map, Tyre and Sidon are up there. And then he encounters someone in the margins, the Canaanite woman, who was asking for, quote-unquote, long-distance miracle, that her daughter, who was not there, be delivered from a demon that was tormenting her. That's why we likened it to the request of the centurion. Okay? A long-distance miracle. Now, this situation is interesting. Why? The woman is shouting, and then Jesus does not respond. Imagine, okay? Imagine the situation. And then the disciples who cannot stand there plead with Jesus to give what she wants. Give it to her, okay? And the woman, even though a non-Jew, knows who Jesus is. And she is well aware of the wonders that he can do. So see here, Christology. She knows who Jesus was. Okay? And the disciples look only at their convenience in wishing that her prayer be heard. Yeah, he listened to her now so that she gives up this shouting. And Jesus does not respond initially, maybe to teach a lesson out of this occasion. And he makes a statement that emphasizes the priority of his mission. What is that? Priority is the house of Israel, and we know that. Israel first and then the Gentiles. Now, he uses the metaphor, and some even have argued this, make this as an argument, no, against Jesus. He calls that woman a dog, okay? But then, that comparison is more endearing rather than insulting. Helping her is akin to taking children's food and throwing it to puppies. It's not really an insult if you look at the language of it. Okay? And the woman bravely responds to Jesus' statement, following up the metaphor that non-Jews are also entitled to the scraps from what Jesus gives. And her answer is praised by Jesus, who affirms her faith. And then what happens? He cures her daughter. So there, now you find Tyre and Sidon. Now, in this part, okay, 15:29 to 31, just 3 verses, there's that summary about the healing of many sick. Now, this one is used to replace the story of Mark in 7:31 to 37 of the spittle healing of a deaf mute. Okay? And the opinion here is this. It is omitted because it might be misunderstood as magic, no? Okay, so spittle and then wow. To remove that idea. Okay? Now there's another multiplication, second part, as what we've seen in Mark, for the 4,000. And what have we interpreted here? That it's the 2 multiplications, one stands for the Jews and then for the other one for the Gentiles. Okay, but that's an interpretation. Okay, and then we also have that hostile confrontations with the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Understandably, this is Matthew, and his language. Okay, when it comes to the Pharisees and Sadducees. So follow the miracles that Jesus has been doing. Those miracles make intelligible that response to the disbelieving request for a sign. Because in Matthew 12, remember, there was already that request for a sign. And then you see it again here in chapter 16, right? And so there are a lot of miracles, and then, give us a sign. And the Pharisees and Sadducees, therefore, cannot interpret the already present signs of the times. So maybe what Jesus did for them, they were not signs. And criticizing his disciples as people who have little faith, for they have not fully understood the bread miracles. So Jesus warns them against the leaven or the teaching of the Pharisees and Sadducees, whom he equates with an evil and adulterous generation. Now comes the heart of what we're talking about here, and you know this very well. Okay, what this is about. The confession of Peter and the first passion prediction. This is special. Why? If we look at how Mark presents it, it's very short. But now let's see the one of Peter. Okay, it's a lot. After that, you are the Messiah, and then the Son of the living God, you see, already profound Christology. And then even the affirmation of Jesus, blessed are you, Simon, son of John. No mere man has given this to you. Okay, so there, Peter confesses Jesus to be the Messiah. And then here, as I said, more material about Peter. When we say Son of the living God, that's a revelation from the Father in heaven. It's not just a matter of human reasoning. So the revelation of Jesus' divine sonship to Paul, and that is Paul speaking, Galatians 1:16, is phrased in almost the same language here. If that revelation constituted Paul an apostle, that made him an apostle, this one constitutes Peter as the rock. So, again, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and even the gates of hell would not prevail against it. So what is the background here in the Old Testament about that acknowledgement of Jesus as the Davidic Messiah, the Son of God? 2 Samuel 7. Remember that? The one that we read before Christmas time during the novena. David's descendant will reign after him, and God will treat him as a son. And that promise was provoked by David's desire to build the house, right? He wanted to build the Lord a house. So I'm in a palace and the Lord is there living in a tent. I'll build him a house. So, but God did not want that. You'll build me a house? No, I will build you a house. So Jesus promised to build a church on Peter, who acknowledges him as the fulfillment of the promise to David. That's not illogical, see? So building not anymore a house, okay, but the church. And here you see the church, no, not as church, small c, okay, ecclesia with the small e, and that is prevalent during the time of Paul. Here it's the church, singular. And if you restricted capitalization, no, in the English language about the church, it's a capital, okay? So there. So what do we find here in Isaiah about the keys, okay? We read this one, no? When we have this as a gospel reading, the first reading is from Isaiah 22:15-25, the establishment of Eliakim as the new prime minister of King Hezekiah of Judah. God places on his shoulder the key of the house of David. He shall open and he shall shut. See the power of the key. And that is in the house of David. And these words are echoed in Matthew 16:19 as Jesus gives to Peter the keys of the kingdom, so that whatever he binds or looses on earth, okay, is bound or loosed in heaven. Okay. Now, there are debates about what is meant by binding or loosing. Is it the power to forgive sins, if you look at John 20:23, or to teach what must be observed, with the result that Peter is the chief rabbi? So there's debate here among the scholars, okay? Now, this section follows a warning against the teaching of the Pharisees and Sadducees. That may support that it's more for the teaching of the church. Note, 23:13, the scribes and Pharisees are criticized for locking the kingdom to human beings. See that? If they're the ones locking it here, it's Peter who binds and looses, who is given the keys for the kingdom. Now, that picture by Matthew of exalting Peter because of his professing what God revealed to him does not cause the evangelists to eliminate those subsequent chastisement of Peter as Satan. You thought now Peter would rather be scot-free. He was exalted, but he was called Satan later on. Why? Because now he thinks again on a human level. See that? It's God who gave him, the Father who gave him what he said. Now he's thinking now in a human level. He cannot accept the notion of the suffering in the prediction of his passion. And in fact, Matthew even sharpens the reproof by Mark when he adds, "You are a scandal to me." Okay? Look, compare it, no? But turning and looking at his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things." See? Look at Matthew. He turned and said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me. You're a scandal to me. For you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things." Okay? Now, the one that comes afterwards is related to the prediction of the suffering. What is required for the disciple, 24-28 in chapter 16. So the suffering of the present is contrasted with future glory. So that contrast, okay? Yeah, you're suffering, but then there's future glory. And Jesus, the Son of Man, is to be the key figure in that glory by bringing with him the kingdom in which his disciples are to have a role. See? Okay, look, compare Matthew 16:24 to Mark 8:34. Almost exactly the same, okay? But then he places on 27 in Matthew, "For the Son of Man is to come with his angels," something eschatological. His angels, the Son of Man, his angels. And then truly I tell you, same, no? Some standing here who will not taste death before they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. The other one, the one of Mark, is to see what the kingdom of God has come with power here. It's now the Son of Man in glory. Okay? So what do we find here? Jesus is Messiah and Son of God. We've seen that within the chapter, that the response of Peter the last time Jesus asked his disciples who they say he was. After having given Peter the keys to the kingdom of heaven, okay, he sternly forbade his disciples to tell anyone that he was the Messiah. Again, traces of the messianic secret. Now, this warning served, among other reasons, why? To forestall any misunderstanding about the Messiah. You know that reason very well, okay? Let's go to that word, now, Messiah. What does it mean? Anointed. So the Messiah is God's anointed one, usually understood as the one chosen to lead the world and save it. The Jews believed that the anointed one would come from David's line and then unify the 12 tribes of Israel and establish peace. And when we think about that, okay, it's a political leader with temporal power. But then it's not what Jesus was saying. That's not his idea. So in this gospel, he tells his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer greatly from the elders, the chief priests and the scribes, and then be killed, and on the third day be raised. And then Peter rebukes him at this, telling him that this must not happen. And the Messiah for them is a political leader. Okay, so different from what Jesus envisions. So he calls him Satan. By the way, this is my reflection of those that I have been telling you. Jesus calls Peter Satan. The one he has recently called Rock, very significant, okay? You are the rock. Now, Satan, and then scandalize. You know this, what scandalizes? To be an obstacle, stumbling block. So that stone is now a stumbling block. So Jesus reiterates the path of suffering by telling his disciples that whoever wishes to follow him must deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. And this path is not easy, but it is sure, for it follows the path of the Messiah and leads to the resurrection on the third day. This was the path the early Christians were taking, suffering. Why? Because they have chosen to follow Jesus and losing their life for his sake. The words of Jesus come as a consolation to them. Now, connected to that, therefore, it's logical that there's that glory after suffering, there's that glory, okay? The transfiguration. Now, we saw this also in Mark, but then there are unique features, okay? In Mark, Jesus' clothes shone like no detergent, no soap, okay, can cleanse. And here, it's not the clothes that shone, it's the face. Why? It's closer to the description of Moses, Exodus 34:29-35. That when after that great theophany at Sinai, then his face shone. And then Peter's role is highlighted, by the way, in Ten Commandments, no? When Moses encountered the Lord, no, in the burning bush, that's what happened to him. His face shone. And again, Peter's role is highlighted. Again, no, a Petrine thing, no, from the saving in the water, etc., and then the profession of faith. Now, him being the leader of the three, and then him the one proclaiming, okay, that let's make 3 booths. Again, no, parallelism with Sinai, booths, when the people were in tents. Okay, and then the Lord was in a tent together with the people. And the voice from the cloud repeats more exactly what the voice from heaven said at Jesus' baptism in 3:17. This is my beloved Son with whom I am well pleased. Okay, therefore, when we look at the transfiguration, it's another step in Matthew's Christological sequence pertaining to what? Divine sonship. And that runs even from the infancy narratives. The child was conceived through the Holy Spirit, through God's revelation about my son, 2:15, okay? And the voice from heaven at the baptism speaking of my beloved Son. To the disciples' recognition after the walking on the water. They worshipped him. And then culminating in Peter's confession. So clearly, Son of God is a major Matthean motive. So the question about Elijah, when they asked, raised by the prophet's presence on the mountain, Elijah was there, and then they were asking, that ends the transfiguration as Jesus and the disciples descend. Now, we also read about the story of the epileptic boy, okay, which we've seen also before. And then we have the second prediction of the Passion. We will not elaborate anymore. It's a mirror of the one of Mark. And then on the temple tax, okay, temple with a question mark, is that tax talked about the temple tax? Okay, so we will not also elaborate on that. And finally, we go to this, okay, the discourse part, 35 verses, okay, the whole of chapter 18. So what do we find here? The disparate collection of ethical teaching, much of it once addressed to Jesus' disciples, that has given a perspective that makes it strikingly suited to an established church, that when you come to think about it, as if he's talking to a community already. Okay, the type of Jesus, of church that only Matthew, not Mass, okay, correct that one, that only Matthew has Jesus mentioned. And on this church, and on this rock I will build my church, the universal church. Not anymore particular churches in the time of Paul. And so here you already see an advancement in ecclesiology. So Matthew connects ecclesiology and Christology. For the apostles are to interpret and teach all that Jesus commanded. Nevertheless, even if a structured church becomes the way which the tradition and memory of Jesus are preserved, okay, so we now have something established, okay, Matthew recognizes the danger that any structure set up in this world tends to take its values from other structures that surround it. So there's that danger, and we have to be careful about it, even until our time. And therefore, this chapter is meant to ensure that those values do not smother the values of Jesus. Okay? So they put it even in the mouth of Jesus. So to readers who struggle with church issues today, this is very helpful. And I know that some of you work in communities, okay, within the church, parish, etc., okay, that this one would be very helpful when you think about it, okay? What do we have in this discourse? So, dispute about the greatness in the kingdom of heaven, who's the greatest, okay, after the passion prediction, and then the condemnation of scandals and temptation, the parable of the lost sheep, that's from Q, because we see it in Luke, in chapter 15, okay? And then the procedure of reproving one's brother, disciples' access to heaven, and the frequency of forgiveness. And then the parable of the unforgiving servant, okay? So these are the topics. So you see here, okay, they are like lessons for the church about the kingdom in heaven, okay? You find that, who's the greatest, and then condemnation of scandals. I will not anymore elaborate. Also the one of the lost sheep, okay? Instead, I would speak about this, okay? That procedure for reproving one's brother, disciples' access to heaven, and the frequency of forgiveness. Do you remember this term in camera caritatis? Okay. Camera means room, okay? It's not what you use to take the picture. In fact, yeah, if you study Italian, this is what you call a false friend, okay? That the camera does not mean that apparatus that you have. It means your room, nella mia camera, in my room, okay? Dove la tua camera? Where's your room? So I think Orlando, no, is in his camera, okay? It's in his room. Are you in your room, Orlando? Okay. And some of you, no, I think most of you are in your room right now. Camera. Why? Why do we call camera? Why do we call the one that you use to take with your camera? Why do you call it such? Because before, it's called the camera oscura, the dark room. And in that dark room, now you're able to take those pictures. So camera caritatis, in the room of charity. Okay, so in the room of charity, it's a Latin expression of medieval origin. What does that mean? A place where no one else may hear. Okay, so the camera is the place where power is exercised, and caritatis is the attitude of love for one's neighbor. It's normally used in connection with the reproach done only in the presence of the person concerned. So do it in camera caritatis, okay, where no one else will hear. And this is the advice given by Jesus in this passage. When he says, if your brother sins against you, you go and tell him his fault between you and him alone. Now, at the event that he does not listen, the matter remains as private as possible. Now, you invite 2 or 3 witnesses, no? Like in a court. But then also remain it private. So here's okay, your best friend and another confrere of yours, no? So we're correcting you now. Okay? And then the gospel passage reveals to us of the manner that the church dealt with such problems at the time of Matthew's gospel. So it must have been like that. That's why it's within the context of the church already. Okay? If you have a problem, okay, do not broadcast it. With this, if you have a problem with somebody, you just correct privately. That could have been very common even at the time of the writing of Matthew's gospel. It tells us how they exhausted all the possibilities before taking drastic measures. Now, if one already becomes incorrigible, then you have to take those measures. And Jesus refers what he has previously told Peter, whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. And this is asserting the power of the church in what she does on earth. It is clear that there's a community at work during the time of the writing of the gospel. Now, and this we see in the final part of this discourse, the community aspect of prayer. Praying together spells wonders. If you pray together, okay? More than that, Jesus is present in 2 or 3 gathered together. Reflected in this gospel passage is the prayer of the church. That is not just one, the prayer of one, it's the prayer of the community. And look at this. In Matthew's gospel, we see Jesus as Emmanuel, God with us, right? At the beginning, his conception and birth signals God's presence among us. And then at the commissioning, at the end of the gospel, Matthew 28, Jesus tells the disciples that he will always be with them until the end of time. You look at that, no? 28:20. So at the beginning, God is with us in Jesus, no? Emmanuel. At the end, I will be with you in the end of the age. Now in the middle, here in the middle of the gospel, he assures them that he is with them when they pray together. I am there with you. So with Jesus, okay? Now when Peter asked Jesus how many times he must forgive his brother who sins against him, he thought he was being generous. When he proposes his answer 7 times, 7 was after all the perfect number. But Jesus was suggesting something more. 70 times 7 times. So by proposing this number, Jesus is saying that no definite number makes forgiveness perfect. Okay? And that leads to the parable of the unforgiving servant. Jesus takes the opportunity to teach about forgiveness. This is the end of this, the ending part of this discourse. So Jesus has made the kingdom of heaven a common topic when he taught the crowds. And when he did so, he made use of parables. So what is this parable? A king who canceled the debt of a servant who owed him a large sum. And the king had mercy on the servant. Now, ironically, this servant who was forgiven did not show the same mercy to another fellow servant. He did not cancel the debt of a fellow servant who owed him, a mere fraction of what he owed the king. So in the end, we see the king punishing the servant who could not forgive his fellow servant's debts. It's a lesson of forgiving our brothers and sisters from our hearts. Okay? And the words of Jesus recall to us the words of the prayer that he had taught earlier. That's why we prayed it at the beginning. Matthew 6:9-13. That which we call the Lord's Prayer. Towards the end, we pray, forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. Now, when in humility we ask the Lord for forgiveness, it is understood that with mercy we have already forgiven those who have asked us for forgiveness. Okay?